When journalists are writing a story, they rely heavily on outside sources as sources for the information that are provided in that story. And many of these sources that the journalists use are experts, people that the journalist considers to be an expert in the subject matter of the story that the journalist is writing about, whether it's healthcare or crime or education. Now, a lot of times in these stories, the journalist will pit experts against each other as a way to create conflict in the story. So sometimes the journalist will actually seek out two experts that have two well-known different points of view. So for instance, in a story about U.S. government spending, the journalist may interview two economists. One economist may say, hey, we need to increase government spending so that we can stimulate the economy, whereas another economist that's interviewed might say, no, we need to cut government spending to get the deficit down. So again, there's like this ping pong effect where the journalist pits contending experts against one another. Now, one criticism of the use of these experts as sources in American journalism is that these sources come from a pretty small segment of society, that the sources don't really represent a broad range of points of views in society. And in particular, some studies have noted that journalists tend to overwhelmingly rely on experts that tend to be white and male, that stories tend to really underrepresent experts that are people of color or are women. So again, that provides us with a very limited background and limited view about these stories that are covered. A standard practice of reporters is to incorporate the concept of balance into their reporting. Balance means presenting all sides of an issue in a story without appearing to favor any one view. So, for instance, when a reporter tries to provide a balanced story about government spending, the reporter might interview a Democrat and then a Republican who each express different views within the story, but the journalist would not favor either the Democrat or the Republican. Now, this section of the chapter raises a couple of, I think, interesting criticisms of this practice of trying to provide balance in stories. First, some critics argue that the way that journalists practice balance tends to really oversimplify the complexity of a lot of the social issues that we face today. For instance, in stories on abortion, for instance, a journalist would typically interview one person who is very opposed to abortion under any circumstances, and then contrast the interview with that person with another person who expresses a very pro-choice view. And that countering those two views, being anti-abortion, pro-abortion, again, really tends to oversimplify the complexity of a lot of our discussions about abortion and the views of the really complicated views of many Americans on this topic. Some critics also argue that this notion of balance is kind of deceptive because the way that it is practiced is to present the perception that the journalist is not taking any side, that the journalist is neutral, objective, and simply dispassionately representing the different points of view of the people that are interviewed in the story. Well, some critics argue that that's not really the case. That's not really what happens. That this tends to disguise the fact that the journalist has a very active role in framing the issue a particular way. And the journalist makes certain choices about who to interview and who not to interview, whose views are included in the story and whose views are ignored. For instance, give you another example here. Let's say that a journalist from the New York Times is doing a story about proposals for greater regulation of banks and financial institutions, all right? So typically a story like this might feature an interview with a Democrat that says, yeah, we need to tighten up on some of these regulations to stop banks from overcharging consumers, and then you'll have a conservative Republican interviewed who will say, no, we don't need more government regulation, let's leave things to the free market, all right? And then the reporter will say, okay, here are these two views, this is the range of debate. But there are other possible views. The journalist could also interview a representative from the social movement Occupy Wall Street that argues that big financial institutions are really exploitative, corrupt, and really rip off the American consumer in a really dramatic way. But we don't really hear those other points of view. So it's interesting to think about the way in which this tactic of balance tends to let the journalist off the hook in terms of disclosing his or her own perspective on the issue being covered in this story. The development and success of cable news channels like MSNBC and Fox News channels have provided some real challenges for more traditional news organizations like CNN that have previously focused more on just straight reporting of the news. Both Fox and MSNBC have found a lot of commercial success focusing more on talk shows featuring opinion and commentary rather than straight news reporting. So, for instance, over at Fox, shows like Bill O'Reilly are really successful, while MSNBC has found a lot of commercial success with Rachel Maddow and other more liberal, progressive hosts. Now, these companies that operate these channels have found this kind of talking head pundit programming really successful for a couple of reasons. One is audience ratings. People really seem to prefer this form of programming featuring opinionated commentators much more so than straight-ahead news shows. Secondly, The parent companies of these program services really like talking head pundit programming because it's much less expensive than standard news reporting. Right? If you're CNN and you're covering the news, you have to pay for a lot of reporters out in the field that are doing their own independent reporting. Right? That costs a lot of money in terms of salaries, expenses, travel costs, and so on. All right. If you're Fox News and you've just got Bill O'Reilly or some other talk show hosts, all you have to have is just the studio and pay for Bill O'Reilly's salary, and that's it. There's no reporting costs. So the success of these channels featuring opinion and commentary have made it much more difficult for a service like CNN that has traditionally focused on news reporting. And in fact, CNN has increasingly struggled in the ratings, that it is perpetually behind Fox News in terms of audiences, and sometimes CNN has even been behind MSNBC. So CNN is trying to figure out how to be successful commercially for the future. How can it continue providing the news reporting that it's known for, but still interest audiences that seem to be more attracted to partisan talking heads. So again, CNN continues to struggle with that. Fake news shows like The Colbert Report and The Daily Show provide a very sharp satire of traditional evening news shows and opinion talk shows like Bill O'Reilly. And it's interesting that the shows use humor as a way to not only critique our news media, but our broader political system. The shows are, I think, also of interest to us because younger people increasingly rely on shows like this for their news and information, right? Where surveys show that oftentimes young people won't pay attention to traditional news media at all, and instead will find out about current events from watching the Daily Show. So it's interesting to think about whether or not someone can be sufficiently informed by just ignoring traditional news media altogether and getting news from these unconventional sources. And I'm wondering if that is the case with any of you. Do you tend to watch these shows rather than regular news media?